Emily, a young girl from a small town in the southeastern United States, has always dreamed of leaving for the metropolis to start a new life. In her 19 years, she was full of ambition, but never found her way. Her parents, tired of her dreams and insecurities, gave her an ultimatum: either she finds a job and becomes independent, or she will have to leave home. Since morning, Emily had been looking at job listings on her phone while sitting in her room. She was trying to figure out what would be the right move for her and what would make her life meaningful. She didn't look for jobs in offices, nor did she dream of a career in big companies. She was always attracted to jobs where she could become indispensable and get good opportunities for development in the future. Looking for a good salary and stability, Emily came across an interesting ad. She read the job description again, looking for a maid for a private house, work in the suburbs. Pay is good, conditions are comfortable. What caught her attention was that the job was in a fairly close location to her, which was a significant advantage. She clicked on the link and started reading the details. The ad was terse, but it sounded confident that this job would pay good money. The only odd thing that immediately caught her eye were some comments about discretionary and owner care. Emily, though initially a bit wary, didn't take it as anything alarming. Maybe she just needed to start working to feel independent. After filling out a form and submitting her resume, she quickly received a response. A few hours later, she received a call inviting her to an interview that was to take place the very next day. Emily quickly decided that she had to give it a try. Her parents had given her no other choice. Perhaps this was her chance, her only chance to get away from the pressure and expectations. She wore simple clothes, not really trying to create the perfect look. The most important thing for her was to get a job. The next morning, she boarded the bus and headed towards her new home. The place was a little farther away than she had anticipated, and it took about an hour to get there. But when she pulled up, her eyes caught a huge mansion with a beautiful garden that looked like a movie set. A feeling of unease gripped her inside. The building looked so gorgeous that Emily felt somehow out of place, like she was in another world. When she reached the door, she was greeted by two men. They were over 30 years old, sturdy, with a confident look. One of them, tall and with a serious expression, introduced himself as John and the other, a little more friendly, as Max. They explained that they would accompany her to her master's room. Emily couldn't understand why they were looking at her so intently, but figured it was just nervousness before the interview. They led her through a long hallway, and Emily noticed that the house was decorated lavishly, but it lacked the usual coziness. It was like a museum, beautiful but cold. As she approached the door of the master's study, Max and John stopped. Emily felt a slight tension in the air. "This is your interlocutor, Emily." "Good luck," John said. Emily entered the study and the door closed behind her. The owner of the house, a young man of about 23, sat behind a large desk, dressed in a strict suit. He looked up and Emily felt his eyes assessing her, examining her face, her body, her expression. "Hi, Emily. It's good to see you." "Have a seat," he said, pointing to the chair across from him. Emily sat down, a little nervously. The landlord seemed friendly, but there was a peculiar sternness in his manner, as if he was used to authority and control. "I see you're a recent graduate, aren't you?" Emily nodded, trying to keep her composure. She wasn't ready for personal questions, but she dared to answer anyway. "Yes, I just graduated and decided to start working to become independent." He nodded, then continued. "And what do you think, Emily, about life in the city? Do you have a boyfriend, husband, or someone to support you in this move?" The question was unexpected, but she tried not to show her embarrassment. "No, I don't have a boyfriend. I want to make my own life." Emily noticed his gaze become even more attentive. He asked a few more questions, as if trying to figure out her personality, her confidence. Finally, he stood up and walked over to the closet, pulling out his maid's uniform. Emily felt excitement growing in her chest. Would she really agree to this? But her financial situation left her no choice. She took the uniform and went to the next room to change. When she returned in a dress that was noticeably short for her taste, she felt somehow uncomfortable. This moment seemed so strange. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't avoid it. Emily returned to the study, where her master was already sitting at his desk again, studying her. She felt his gaze on her as if to say, "You're mine now." Emily stood at the door, unable to take a step further. The dress she wore was too short. It barely covered her thighs, and her feet, shod in simple ballet flats, seemed too plain against the rich interior. It all seemed somehow out of place, awkward. She could feel her host's gaze on her, which never left her side. It was a strange feeling, an almost invisible heaviness that filled the air. The host, a young man with an inexpressive but serious face, was sizing her up. He didn't say a word, but his gaze was full of questions. Emily felt as if she were on a stage, where her every move or gesture lent itself to scrutiny. "You know, it's not quite what I expected from a maid," he said at last, and there was no coldness in his voice, but there was no warmth either. He just spoke as if from a textbook, emphasizing every word. Emily wanted to object, but couldn't find the words. What was she supposed to say back? She was here out of necessity. She didn't want to be the object of someone else's scrutiny. She just needed stability. The dress was short, yes. But was that supposed to solve everything? Her host leaned forward a little, his face growing more serious, and she felt more tension in the air. He studied her, as if he wanted to understand something that was hidden behind her eyes. "Are you sure this is the job for you?" he asked, tilting his head as if pondering aloud. He spoke slowly with emphasis as if each word had deep meaning. "You have a lot of other tasks to do here besides cleaning. Are you ready for that?" Emily, pulling herself together, finally replied, "Yes, I'm ready. I need this. I'm ready to work." His gaze didn't change, and for a moment their eyes met. It was a strange feeling. She sensed that he was expecting something more from her than just an answer. It was hard for her to understand exactly what he was expecting, but something about the silence made her feel as if she wasn't quite answering his question. Her words were perhaps too general. He stood up and walked over to the table, wiping non-existent dust from his face as if the gesture was part of his routine, something automatic he did when he wanted to accomplish something. He turned back toward Emily with an expression on his face that was both soft and stern. "You know you're not alone in this house," he said. His words sounded like a challenge. "I live here alone, but I have a team that works with me. Their job is not only to help me with household matters, but also to keep things in order. You'll meet them later." Emily, not yet used to this atmosphere, only nodded. She realized that this wasn't just a job, it was more than that, something she would have to face in the coming weeks, maybe even months. She looked at his face again. He was young, not old, but he already seemed confident and commanding. His look said he was used to being the boss, and in this house everything had to go by his rules. And if she was going to work here, she had to realize that she herself had to become part of those rules as well. He continued, "You didn't come here by accident, did you? I'm interested in you. You're not like the others. You must realize that if you stay, your life here will change." Emily felt her heart beat faster. She couldn't understand why she was so caught up in his words. He spoke not just as an employer, but as a man who knew he could manipulate the situation. How to influence her choices. I hope you don't change your mind, he said quietly, watching her reaction. It was as if he was waiting for something from her, but Emily couldn't figure out what it was. She didn't know how to respond. What was the right thing to do in this situation? Should she just say yes and work as she planned? But something inside told her that this job, this house, this man, wasn't as easy as she'd imagined. I won't change my mind, she finally exhaled, feeling the tension in her body ease a little. But still something in her chest remained in place, preventing her from relaxing completely. Master raised an eyebrow and nodded silently, as if her answer satisfied him. He took a step toward the door and opened it, gesturing for her to follow him. Then let's get started, he said. I'll show you to your room and explain what you'll be doing today. Emily followed him, feeling her feet barely touch the floor. This house, this man, these looks, it was all so new and foreign that she felt like she was in some strange, undefined reality. All she could do was follow him and hope that this day would not be something she would regret in the future. Emily followed the owner through the long corridors of the house. Her footsteps echoed through the spacious halls, where the ceilings were so high they seemed endless. The walls were adorned with paintings that, despite their beauty, seemed cold and expressionless. The entire house was designed in such a way that, no matter who was inside, there was an overwhelming feeling that no one could truly feel at home here. The owner walked ahead, his steps confident, almost mechanical. Emily tried to maintain her composure, but her inner tension continued to grow. Each room they passed seemed isolated from the outside world, as though this house was an island she had just stepped onto, and now she couldn't figure out how to escape. When they reached the door, the owner turned to her. This is your room. Here, you'll work and rest. Just know that everything that happens in this house will be under my control, he said, his tone as if explaining something obvious, but it made her feel slightly uneasy. He offered neither a key nor a compliment, just silently opened the door. Emily stepped inside. The room was cozy but very strictly decorated. A bed with a dark blue duvet, a large window with heavy curtains, and a desk with an expensive lamp. Everything was in its place, with no extra details, as if prepared for someone who shouldn't be thinking about anything other than work. This was her apartment, but she didn't feel like the owner of this room. It was a place where she could stay, but never truly feel at home. You can rest a bit. You have time to get used to the surroundings. I'll be nearby if you need anything explained, the owner said, his voice calm, but with an undertone of inevitability, as if his presence was something she couldn't escape. He didn't enter the room, but stood in the doorway, watching her closely. Emily stood still, unsure of what to do. She understood that he was young and attractive, but at the same time, there was something in his gaze that made her feel small and insignificant. Thank you, she said, though her voice sounded uncertain. She didn't know what else to say in that situation. He nodded, then turned and left, leaving her alone with this unfamiliar reality. She approached the window, pulled back the curtain, and looked outside. The same strange world beyond the window seemed so foreign. In the distance, she could see the outline of a forest, and for a moment, she was overwhelmed by a feeling of melancholy, as if she had been trapped in a house with no exit. But now, Emily knew there would be no way out, at least not until she fulfilled her obligations. She turned to survey her room and noticed a small package on the desk. It was a gift, or rather, something like a signal that she shouldn't think about her previous life, shouldn't think about the future, but simply accept what was happening now. She unwrapped it. Inside, there were several beauty products, a bottle of perfume, and a small card with a short message written on it. You're now part of the team. Good morning, Maid. Emily felt her heart tighten with uncertainty again. It was strange. She was just one element in a large machine that moved according to its own rules. How long could she stay here without violating her personal principles, without betraying herself? After a while, as Emily sat in her room, thinking about this, she heard footsteps in the hallway. It was the two men, John and Max. They entered her room without knocking, which was strange, but before Emily could object, Max calmly explained, "You need to get ready. Today is your first shift. Dinner time is approaching. You'll be helping in the kitchen. Just follow us and we'll show you how everything is organized." Emily felt her anxiety rise again. She wasn't prepared for working in such a house, but it seemed her opinion didn't matter. She was here not to choose, but to perform. Though she didn't understand what this meant, she clenched her teeth and stood up. With Max and John, she walked through the long, confusing corridors and descended into the basement kitchen. It was warm, filled with the smell of freshly prepared food, but the atmosphere still left her with a sense of something absurd and foreign. Max gestured toward a shelf of ingredients. "Your task is to prepare this. Dinner will be in an hour, so hurry up." Emily wasn't an experienced cook, but she quickly figured out what she needed to do. What surprised her most was how she could be part of this huge house, part of someone's life, while still not understanding what was really going on. Everything was happening so fast, she didn't even have time to realize that every step she took was now tied to this place. During dinner, the owner was in his own room. No one disturbed him, and he didn't interfere with the work. However, Max and John stayed nearby, like shadows, following his orders and reminding everyone of his authority. As Emily carried out her duties, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was part of this plan, even though she didn't fully understand it. Her day ended later than she expected. She returned to her room, exhausted but with the feeling that everything was just beginning. Several days passed, and Emily grew more accustomed to life in the house. With each passing day, she became more confident in her duties, although she still felt like an outsider in this world. In the mornings, she worked in the kitchen, and in the evenings, she helped around the house, performing small tasks that others took care of. But despite all this, every time she encountered the owner, she felt uneasy. He was a mystery to her, and every look he gave made her heart race, her thoughts getting tangled. One day, at the end of the week, when she had grown used to her responsibilities and felt fairly comfortable around the new people, the owner invited her into his office. "Emily," he said as she approached the door. "Come in for a moment, I have a task for you." Emily felt a jolt in her stomach. Why had he invited her now? She couldn't understand what was happening, but she stepped into the room, trying to conceal her inner fear. He was sitting at his desk, as usual, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit. This time, he didn't look at her with the cold interest he had shown before, but by his expression, Emily sensed that something unexpected was about to happen. "I need you to help me with an important meeting," he said. "But for that, you need to look the part. You look good in your uniform, but for this, I want you to wear something else." Emily froze, feeling her face immediately heat up. Why did he need her to look different? The usual days, when she wore her maid's uniform, didn't make her question things. But now, she felt that he meant something more. "Don't worry, it's not related to your duties," he said, noticing her hesitation. "You wanted to work here, didn't you? This is an important meeting. We need to make an impression." She hesitated for a moment, but ultimately nodded. Thoughts spun in her mind, but she couldn't refuse. All she had to do was treat it like any other task. He went over to the wardrobe and pulled out several outfits, placing them on the desk. "I've picked out a few things for you. This is for an important meeting. Try them on and let me know what you think." Emily felt awkward. Why did she have to try on these expensive dresses if she was just a maid? Her job was cleaning, not attending events. But despite her doubts, she couldn't refuse. "Okay," she said, trying to stay calm. "I'll try them on." When she closed the bathroom door and began inspecting the clothes, her heart started to race again. Each of these outfits looked far too expensive for her. If she were someone else, it would all seem just magnificent, but in her situation, the clothes felt foreign, like something she didn't deserve. Nevertheless, she chose one dress, a bright red, figure-hugging one. When she saw herself in the mirror, she immediately felt her nervousness rise. The dress was too revealing for her taste, too short, too tight. She looked at herself in the mirror again, about to put the dress back. But at that moment, the bathroom door suddenly opened. Emily quickly turned around, her face flushed, and she hurried to cover her body. She hadn't expected the owner to enter without knocking. "Sorry," he said, quickly stepping back, but his gaze froze on her. He hadn't expected things to happen so quickly. Emily stood there in the dress, not knowing what to say or how to react. The owner stood in the doorway, and his expression shifted slightly. He was clearly thrown off, but didn't immediately turn away. Emily could feel her face burning and her breathing becoming quicker. It was a moment when neither of them knew what to do. In his eyes, there was something strange, an odd mixture of surprise and curiosity. She took a step back, frozen in silent confusion. "Sorry. I didn't mean to scare you," he said, but his voice was uncertain, as if he was trying to fix the situation but didn't know how. He turned to leave, but his gaze lingered on her. You look good in that dress," he said, almost holding back his voice. Emily felt her cheeks burning. She tried to find words to somehow fix the situation, but she couldn't. Her thoughts were tangled, and shame overwhelmed her. "Thank you," she finally breathed out, trying to avoid his gaze. The owner took a step back, closing the door behind him. Emily was left standing in the bathroom, feeling her hands tremble. There was something intimate and elusive about the moment, like something that shouldn't have happened. Yet it did. When she returned to her room, she had the distinct feeling that something had shifted between them. It was an awkward silence that couldn't simply be a coincidence. She couldn't put her finger on what exactly it was, but clearly, that moment had brought them closer. And although she didn't fully understand what was happening, she sensed that a new dynamic had formed between them. After Emily returned to her room, she tried to gather her thoughts. Her mind felt empty, and all her actions in that moment seemed chaotic and uncontrollable. The embarrassment of what had just happened didn't leave her. She felt that something had changed. But what exactly? A few minutes after she had closed her door, a faint knock echoed. It was strange because she wasn't expecting anyone. She walked to the door, cautiously opened it, and there stood the owner. His expression was different, not as it had been before. He wasn't stern, but his gaze was attentive, almost wary. "I wanted to talk to you," he said, and his voice was much softer than usual. Emily felt her heart beat faster again. She didn't know how to react to this request. She tried to hide her awkwardness by offering a smile, but her face clearly betrayed her unease. I didn't mean for it to happen like this," she said, trying to regain her composure. "If I did something wrong—" "No, you didn't do anything wrong," he interrupted her, his voice calm and sure. "You're just different for this place. I'm used to everyone here doing their work without asking too many questions. But you're different." Emily didn't know how to respond. The owner's words sounded strange. He was her employer, but now she couldn't shake the feeling that there was some sort of tension between them. And it wasn't just because of her embarrassment, but because his words made her feel like she was part of something bigger than just the job. "I think you don't quite understand what's happening," he continued, taking a step closer and lowering his voice slightly. "You're not just a maid. You intrigue me." "I can't help but notice that." Emily felt her cheeks flush again. She tried to process what he had just said, but all she could think of was this. Could it just be some sort of misunderstanding? Maybe he meant something completely different, but for some reason, it was hard for Emily to believe that. I don't know what to say," she said, her words catching in her throat. "I'm just here to work. That's all." "I'm not." The owner stepped closer, his gaze growing more focused, and he stopped just shy of interrupting her words. "I understand that you want to keep your distance, but I can't ignore this. You can't be here without me noticing how you change the atmosphere in this house." Emily felt her breath grow more shallow. She couldn't understand what he was trying to say. Was it just an inappropriate compliment? Or did he really mean something more? Her thoughts were overloaded. She couldn't push away the feeling that everything was happening too quickly. The awkwardness, the tension, the pressure, everything felt new and unfamiliar. The owner stepped forward again, and her breath caught. He was so close now that she could feel his presence, his breath. He wasn't rude or insistent, but his proximity made her feel like he was testing her boundaries. "I don't want you to feel uncomfortable," he said, noticing her hesitation. "Just think about it, and if you don't want to work here, I won't force you. But you have to understand, my life here is different from the usual." Emily, struggling with her thoughts, took another step back. Everything was happening too fast, and she couldn't figure out how to handle this flood of emotions and obligations. I'm not sure I understand everything," she said softly, more to herself than to him. "I need time." He nodded, as if his understanding of the situation was genuine. "I'm not rushing you. You'll figure out what's right for you." Emily felt the tension within her ease slightly. The owner wasn't being pushy, but his words left a strange mark on her soul. She could feel how his presence continued to affect her, stirring mixed emotions. "All right," she said, not knowing what else to add. "I'll think about it." The owner nodded quietly and left, leaving Emily alone. She stood in the room for a long while, trying to calm herself and sort out her feelings. She couldn't shake the thought that something had indeed changed. He spoke as though there was already an invisible barrier between them, one that needed to be crossed. When she returned to her duties, she felt the tension in the air grow even stronger. Every movement, every glance, every step seemed significant now. She couldn't just be a part of this house anymore, not the way she had been before. Several days passed, and despite Emily's attempts to return her life to its usual rhythm, she still felt that something was wrong between her and the owner of the house. It was like an invisible tension hanging in the air. Every time they crossed paths, her heart would start racing. The atmosphere in the house had changed, and her own thoughts wouldn't leave her alone. One evening, after finishing her shift and about to head to her room, she suddenly heard footsteps behind her. Emily turned around and met the owner's gaze. He was standing in the hallway, holding a cup of something hot. "Would you like a cup of tea?" he asked, as if nothing had happened between them. He was calm, his voice soft, but there was still something in his eyes that made her heart skip a beat. Emily froze. She felt an uncomfortable tension settle in her. He was so close, but she didn't know how to act around him. How should she respond to his offer? What would this look like? But she realized she couldn't just walk away. "Yes, thank you," she said, giving a nervous smile. Tea had always helped her relax, and this was an opportunity to get out of the strange state she had been in. Maybe it would help her understand better what was going on. He led her to the dining room, where a cozy table surrounded by soft chairs awaited. He handed her the cup and sat across from her, his eyes never leaving her. It made her feel a little uneasy. "You work well, Emily," he said, his voice quiet but confident. "I like the way you approach everything. You don't let anyone down." Emily felt a light blush rise to her cheeks, but she tried to remain calm. "I'm just doing my job," she said, taking a small sip of tea. Oddly enough, with each sip, she started feeling the tension melt away. She knew this conversation was important, and she couldn't allow herself to appear too distracted. "But you're more than just a maid," he continued, his gaze becoming more intense. "You've brought something else here. The atmosphere in this house has changed. I can feel that you're not like everyone else." Emily tried not to show her nervousness, but her hand trembled slightly as she held the cup. Everything he said was true, but she couldn't understand what he expected from her. Why was he saying these things? "I don't understand what you mean," she said, trying to distract herself. "I'm just doing my job." The owner leaned forward slightly, his eyes locked onto hers. "Can't you see? It's more than just a job. You can't tell me you don't feel it. You can't say you don't sense how you're affecting this house." Emily fell silent. She tried to find the words to explain her feelings, but they didn't come. It wasn't easy. Every day, she felt her attachment to this house, to its inhabitants, grow. She felt that something was changing, but she couldn't understand how it was affecting her. He continued, "You're not just filling the house with an atmosphere. You've brought light, Emily. It's like you illuminate everything around you. I can't help but notice it." It was as if these words were more than just a compliment. They sounded increasingly intimate, and Emily felt her heart race again. She wanted to say something, but she didn't know what exactly. I don't know what to say," she finally said. "I'm just here to work." He was silent for a few seconds, then his gaze grew even more penetrating. He was clearly expecting something from her, but her silence only made the situation more tense. Not knowing how to behave, she tried to compose herself and quietly said, "I appreciate the compliments, but I really need to get back to work." He didn't answer immediately. He simply sat across from her, watching her reaction, as though trying to understand what she was feeling. "I understand," he said at last. "But know this, there will always be a place for you here if you decide to stay. You're important to this house, Emily." His words sounded like something more than just an invitation. They were filled with meaning, with a hidden message that was unclear to her but, at the same time, somehow magnetic. She felt her heart clench with awkwardness, but she couldn't respond. Instead, she simply stood up, feeling that it was time to leave. "I'll go," she said, standing from the table. "Thank you for the tea." He stood and walked toward her, almost touching her shoulder as she headed toward the door. Emily quickly turned around, and their gazes met. He was so close that she could feel his breath. His eyes held her gaze. "If you need anything, you know where to find me," he said, his voice now softer than before, almost like a plea. Emily nodded, unable to answer. She quickly left the room and headed to her own, feeling her heart still racing in her chest. When she closed the door, her mind was flooded with conflicting thoughts. Everything had changed. She couldn't understand what was happening between them, and she didn't know how to react. She wasn't ready for these changes, but one thing was clear: she was no longer just a maid in this house. Time passed, and Emily tried to focus on her work to distract herself from the familiar tasks. She still couldn't make sense of the feelings the owner of the house stirred in her. His words and glances continued to linger, but she didn't know how to process them. He was her employer, and she was just a maid. Despite the growing attachment she felt, she tried to maintain her distance, understanding that her position didn't allow her to expect anything more. One late morning, as she was finishing up cleaning the hallway, she heard footsteps coming from a nearby room. Emily turned her head and saw the door to the owner's office opening. a woman stepped out. She was striking, attention-grabbing, and clearly drew the eye. It was a young woman with well-groomed dark hair, dressed in a tight-fitting dress that accentuated her figure. In her hand, she held a handbag, and she was smiling broadly, clearly pleased with herself. Emily immediately felt a pang in her chest. She froze, unsure of what to do. The woman, unaware of her presence, walked past her, heading quickly for the exit. Emily couldn't help but notice the glance the woman cast over her shoulder toward the owner, a look full of flirtation and playful intent. That look, so light and carefree, made Emily feel her insides tighten. Emily wanted to turn away and continue with her work, but her gaze involuntarily lingered on the owner, who was standing in the doorway of his office. He looked slightly disoriented, but still wore a small smile on his face. He didn't rush to follow the woman as she left the house, but there was a warmth in his eyes that couldn't be hidden, a warmth that spoke of something more than just a professional relationship. Her body was filled with a burning sense of jealousy that she didn't know how to handle. Her heart was racing, and her breathing grew heavy. This feeling was foreign and uncomfortable. Emily quickly turned away to hide her embarrassment and returned to her cleaning. She tried to focus, but her thoughts kept circling back to the woman and the confidence with which she had interacted with the owner. What had that been? Just a casual visit or something more? Emily tried to convince herself that nothing special had happened. But jealousy, like a knife's edge, pierced through her, leaving her unsettled. A few minutes later, the owner approached her. She couldn't understand what this might be about. Perhaps he had noticed her strange behavior. He spoke politely, but with a hint of caution in his voice. "Emily, would you mind if I spent some time with her? We need to talk. She's an old acquaintance. I need to discuss a couple of business matters with her." Emily felt her chest tighten at the news. Though she understood that everything he mentioned was part of his work, it still stung. Old acquaintance? Those words sounded as though there was something more between them than just business. She tried to remain calm and force a smile, though inside, she was far from composed. "Of course, no problem," she replied, but there was a slight tremor in her voice. He nodded and, with a gentle smile, returned to his office. Emily remained in the hallway, her thoughts racing in circles as the feelings of jealousy and uncertainty tormented her. She couldn't understand what she was feeling toward the owner. Why was she so upset about this woman? She should be professional and not let her emotions interfere with her work. But it was impossible. As the hours passed and she continued her duties around the house, the thoughts about the visit consumed her more and more. She tried to concentrate on the task at hand, but her mind kept returning to the woman who had walked through the hallway and the strange, almost intimate way the owner had interacted with her. Could her feelings have grown so strong that she couldn't keep them inside any longer? Eventually, as the day drew to a close, the owner returned to the living room. His face was calm, and there was nothing alarming in it. He said the woman had left and that he would be busy with work again. Emily tried to remain polite, but this time, her gaze couldn't conceal what was happening inside her. The jealousy she had tried to ignore finally broke through. She knew that, in this house, she was feeling increasingly out of place, and her relationship with the owner was becoming more and more complicated. With each passing day, Emily's relationship with the owner of the house became more complicated. She continued working, performing her duties, but couldn't help noticing how her feelings were shifting. The owner was no longer just an employer to her, he had become a source of her emotions. He inspired, troubled, and excited her. And all of this seemed so far from what she had considered right. She found herself thinking more and more about that woman's visit and how the owner had stayed with her, how they discussed something important, and Emily had no right to intervene. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was different with her, more relaxed, more confident. This sensation was unbearable for Emily, and one day, when she crossed paths with him again, she couldn't keep her feelings hidden anymore. That evening became a turning point. The owner, as usual, came into the living room where Emily was finishing her work. He noticed her mood and approached her, sensing that something was wrong. "Emily, is something wrong?" "You look different," he said, his gaze serious, concern flashing in his eyes. Emily looked at him, and everything inside her boiled over. She couldn't stay in the shadows any longer. She couldn't hide her feelings anymore. Her voice was quiet but firm. She didn't know what would happen next, but she decided to be honest. "I saw how you were with that woman, and it was hard for me. I felt jealousy take over me. I don't want to feel this way, but I can't control it. I know it's wrong, that I'm just working here, but I can't shake this feeling." His face didn't change, but understanding flickered in his eyes. He stepped closer, and his words became softer, almost intimate. "I didn't know you felt this way. That wasn't my intention, Emily. You must understand, you're important to me. But I didn't want you to think that my relationships with other women have anything to do with you." She met his gaze, feeling her heart tighten. She knew words were one thing, but feelings were another. He could say whatever he wanted, but her inner turmoil remained, a reality she struggled to face. "I don't know what to do," she said, trying to keep her emotions in check. "I don't know how to separate this, how to just be with you as a colleague. I can't keep doing this." He was silent for a moment, and then, as though deciding it was time to make everything clear, he stepped toward her and said, "Emily, I'm not going to make you feel uncomfortable. You're not just a maid. You're not one of the women I interact with for business purposes. I value your honesty, your work. But I also can't ignore that something more than just an employer-employee relationship is happening between us." Her heart jumped again. She hadn't expected him to admit it. And although his words sounded like a confession, something inside her still ached. I can't allow myself to be with you like that." "It's wrong," she whispered. He nodded, but his gaze was soft and deep, like never before. "You have to make the decision yourself, Emily. I won't pressure you, but I can't hide my feelings anymore. I can't just be your employer anymore." The silence that followed his words was heavy and long. Emily felt that something important hung in the air, that her life in this house would never be the same. Everything she knew, everything she felt, was blurring, and she was standing before a choice that was new and unexplored for her. She sighed, looking at him, feeling the tension in her body slowly ease. "I need time," she said, holding back tears. "I can't make a decision right now." He nodded silently, stepping back, giving her space to think. "Take all the time you need," he said, his voice deep and quiet. "I'll wait." Emily stood before him, her heart still pounding with tension, but a new perspective had emerged within her soul. All the recent storm of emotions she had been feeling, jealousy, insecurity, and even fear, began to dissolve. Everything she needed to understand was simple and clear. She could no longer ignore what she was feeling. She could no longer run from her emotions and pretend everything was fine when inside her there were so many unresolved decisions. The owner of the house remained silent, watching her with respect and understanding in his eyes. He waited, giving her time, but did not rush her. She could feel this, along with his inner patience. He was ready to accept her decision, whatever it may be. But Emily knew she had to make a choice, and at that moment, more than ever, she understood that her feelings were stronger than any doubts. She took a step forward, as if this moment had become her decision, and they both felt it. Emily met his gaze, and she could no longer hide what was inside her. I can't do this anymore, she said, her voice trembling slightly from emotion. I can't hide how I feel. I can't ignore that I want to be with you. Her words hung in the air, but they were the moment when everything changed. He approached her slowly, as though every movement was thoughtful and significant. His eyes were filled with some hidden tension, as though he had been waiting for this. And finally, he stood before her, his face so close that Emily could feel his breath. It was a moment when they both knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Are you sure? His voice was quiet and soft, almost with a hint of concern. But in his gaze, there were no doubts anymore. He knew this was the moment when they could take a step that would change everything. Emily nodded slowly, no longer able to keep all these feelings inside. She took his hand and felt her heart start to race again. She was ready. It wasn't just a yes, it was her decision to be with him, despite all the barriers and doubts. Yes, she said. I want to be with you. In the next instant, without waiting another second, he gently but decisively pulled her towards him. He kissed her, first cautiously, almost exploring, but soon their kiss became deeper, more passionate, fully aware of what they had just done. Everything they felt was in that kiss. Everything they had experienced, and all the doubts they had tried to overcome, vanished, giving way to a real and sincere feeling. Emily felt her body respond to his touch, and she didn't try to stop it. Everything happening felt so natural that she didn't even notice when she found herself in his arms. He held her as if she were part of him, and this closeness, which once seemed impossible, had now become her reality. When they pulled apart, their breathing was heavy and erratic, but they both knew no more words were needed. They couldn't say everything they wanted, but in this moment, the silence was enough. They understood each other without words. I'm glad you're here, he said quietly, his voice filled with meaning that could not be expressed in words. Emily smiled, and there was something in her eyes that she could never have described before. It was a feeling of complete acceptance, as if everything in her life had finally fallen into place. She finally felt like she had found what she had been searching for. I am too, she whispered, looking at him.